Nicole, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining me all the way from California in the US. I came across your profile and just had to connect with you, knowing that you help nurses and medtech professionals to end burnout. Please enlighten our audience with your history.
Hi, yes. Well, thank you so much, Trisha, for having me. So I came to do what I'm doing right now because I've been in the medical field as well. I worked as a unit secretary, monitor tech, and for those who are not aware, I was actually the person who read the little EKGs on our patients, which is your heartbeat to explain. So anyway, without going too much further into that, that was my job. And I did that for 6 years. I worked day shift and night shift, and I worked directly with the nurses in the unit. So everything that happened to them happened to me. We worked as one big team. And I ended up moving away from that and kind of working more towards business. I ended up getting my MBA and I was moving towards the business field. And so without being too lengthy, it was a bit of a bumpy ride because of course, during that time we were going through the recession. And I know that was felt globally, in the 2008 to honestly recently 2019 period for a lot of people like myself. So there was a lot of professional growth that I was able to do, a lot of professional enlightenment that happened by going through this process. And so when the pandemic hit in 2020, I was let go from my position in HR and recruiting after being there for 4 years. And that's where I was like, okay, I need to do something to help people who have been going through the same struggles I've been. And so that's where I really landed on trying to help people through their career shift, and then more specifically helping people in the medical industry who are feeling that burnout that we're hearing about so much now, and helping them figure out where they want to go from there, or helping them actually just kind of recenter and realign with their purpose again.
This is fantastic because I think no matter what industry you're in, whether it's medical nursing field or any finance, it doesn't matter what domain, burnout is such a significant factor. And especially I know the Middle East can be a little bit different to the rest of the world, having experience both sides myself. The working hours are completely different. There's no sort of deadline to when you're finishing. And I want to come back to the word burnout because I think it can be quite subjective. So how would you define, or what is burnout?
Right, exactly. Well, and I actually just I'm starting my own little mini podcast of sorts. I call it the toaster. Welcome to the toaster, where we deal with the burnt toast. But really burnout, right? Because you have the way I look at two different types of burnout. There's burnout from being like, oh, I've got all this on my plate. I'm doing all this stuff. I'm tired. I need to take a mental and emotional break, but it doesn't mean that you don't like or love what you're doing. The burnout that I deal with is really at its core. It's for the individuals who should have stopped a while ago and kept pushing forward. And now they're at their absolute breaking point, and this is honestly this type of burnout, especially for medical professionals working in acute care settings, is extremely detrimental to their mental and physical health. And so it's very important to understand that type of burnout where people start thinking they start feeling trapped and thinking of things that they shouldn't to try to escape. And, those are the people that I'm trying to help and help them really identify with where they want to be. And the way that they do that is through what I call identifying their soul need, right? And so, I mean, that's a whole nother conversation. If you want me to, I can get into that. But that's to delineate the two different types of burnouts, to understand where you might be on that spectrum. I hope that helps a little bit.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think no one teaches you this really. You know, you come as a graduate, you come out of university fresh, eager, ready to get into the workforce. No one really discusses about burnout. You get to your mid-level, you know, part of your career, and you're kind of hanging on by a string. You're then probably juggling family and still the work plus shift work for a lot of those, you know, healthcare professionals. And then you get to the senior level, and you've got all of that plus your own little life goals and aspirations. And nowhere along the your career trajectory does anyone really guide you about burnout unless you actively go and you know, put the strategies in place to prevent it. I want to ask you, do you think it's like an employer responsibility to be advocating for burnout, or should it be someone at an individual level to be proactively learning about these strategies?
Yeah, you know, that's a really good question. It's definitely, I wouldn't say always 100% the employer's responsibility. If we're going to do a broad brushstroke, in hospitals, I would say the burden rests with them more, with the employer more, because they know the type of environment that their staff has to go through. One of the things I always used to say to my coworkers after I had left the medical field, I was like, no matter how bad your day is, nobody's going to die on it. Like, nothing is actually life and death here like it is in the medical field. And it's a whole different mentality when that is literally your everyday. When people can die on your shift and that's normal, that's a whole different mindset that your employee has to be in. And so yes, I think this pandemic should have opened the eyes to many hospital administrators of how important it is to be aware of your employees' mental health and really put measures into place to help prevent that burnout.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And not to take anything away from burnout, but on the flip side, it actually helps with staff retention, employee engagement, and the sense of satisfaction if the employer actually looks after this. Because at the end of the day, it will reduce costs. I know we shouldn't be linking, you know, emotional behaviors or
No, you 100% sure. I don't want to cut you off. You know, but you're 100% right. Like, I literally just did a post today talking to hospitals, and yes, you should be linking that bottom line, but understanding how to protect it, right? Because unfortunately, the medical industry, particularly in the US, is a privatized business. And so that's where the focus is. But yes, my post said today, it was like, hey, you guys, your back door is wide open. You know, your staff is quitting at an unprecedented rate. So yes, I'm sorry to cut you off, but you hit the nail on the head there.
No, I am glad that we're aligned, because we obviously haven't discussed any of this before. And I guess it just comes from an insight of both of us probably having a little bit of the medical background as well as the recruitment, and then working out what do the clients need from a recruitment perspective and what does the floor staff need. So, you know, connecting the dots is something important, and you probably don't have those insights unless you can see the bigger picture. So yeah, and I really would like to touch on, so burnout is something that we all need to be preventing no matter what sector you're in, but how do you find the balance? Because obviously a lot of people want to be sure that they're high performing and, you know, excelling and having that career growth, but then on the other hand is burnout, which can be a side effect of putting in all of that effort.
Right, exactly. And, you know, and that's what I do is help people find that career balance through probably, you know, well, what's the word I'm looking for? Different methods, I guess that's not the exact word, but unorthodox methods. You know, it's nothing super crazy, but we are so like up here in our brains all the time, you know, always with the logic, that we forget to listen to our heart. And what, again, like I mentioned, our soul need, we forget to listen to our soul. Our logic is so busy running the show all the time, you know, so that's where you're really going to find your career balance, is understanding, what does my soul need? You know, what do I really want out of this life? And if you really ask yourself the question, unless you've done the work, you probably don't know the answer, or you might have a very surface answer. but it's way, way under there. And that's what I do, is I help my clients understand what it is that they really want. And a lot of times they'll find it doesn't align with even like their interests or what they're doing, so then it's a matter of being able to kind of tailor your life as it exists to reflect something that's going to feed your soul. Because at the end of the day, like I mentioned, you have that typical burnout. Everybody gets it, no matter if you are doing what you love the most. If you're 100% in alignment with your soul need, you're still going to get tired, right? You're going to get burned out. You're going to put too much on your plate. You're going to have to take a step back, but that's different. You can kind of recenter and come back to it versus actually understanding what you need. So, I hope that makes sense. I'm trying to like.
No, it's fantastic because I guess, I sort of preach the same message to my clients. So it's rather than just applying for jobs, I'm just linking this to my sector and my audience, but rather than just applying for, say, 50 different jobs every week because you're desperate for work, it's so important that you research the company, have a look at their values, their strategic vision. Are they in line with your personal goals, to find out, are you going to be a good fit for that company, and vice versa? And of course, will you match within the culture? Because at the end of the day, you won't last long if they're not aligned. So it might take time, on your job search, and it requires a little bit of homework to be able to work out what is this company. But for longevity, it's so important to be doing that. I don't know if you agree, but that's definitely what I preach.
Well, 100%. And the other thing I tell people too is that, in my program that I put people through, I tell them that your resume is the last step. So many people want to jump right. They're like, okay, I want to make a career change. Let me start working on my resume. But your resume is a snippet, or your CV, your resume is a snippet of who you are and what you want to do and where you want to go. How can you fill that out so that a recruiter understands what you want if you don't know what you want,
Yep.
So you have to understand yourself first. And when I walk people through that, it's amazing, because then we can put it clearly down on a resume, and then they can go get the job with confidence because they know the skills and abilities that they have. They can be confident in it, feel value, and they can communicate clearly to a recruiter about what they want and what their goals are. So yes, yeah, I'm right there with you.
Yeah, I love it, because your CV should be one of many tools. And you've got 2.5 pages to be able to describe your work history, your values, your unique selling proposition, and which I guess why these days now having a strong presence on the digital space is so important, because you can really build your own personal brand and showcase what you believe and your values are, I guess. So yeah, and it all comes down to personal brand, I think. So many different mediums now: Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube. So you need to maximize these platforms to be able to get yourself out there.
Right.
So how do you tell? How do you know if you're applying for all these different jobs, you want career balance, you don't want burnout? How do you know if you're in the right industry or not?
Well, that is, for me, what I tell my clients. I walk them through my 6-step program. And again, like I said, it's kind of unorthodox because I pump the brakes on all the tangibles, right? Again, like doing your resume, doing your online branding, all the pre-interview prep. Like I do that all later for the clients if that's the direction they're going. But we really stop and take a look internally, and I do this step by step. I even start with just motivation, because you don't realize it, but having the motivation to make a major change in your life, that can actually take time to build up. Have you ever thought about doing something, Trisha? I know you've done so much, so I'm sure there was a point where in your business where you're like, oh my God, I'm just exhausted from that thought about making this shift or making this change, right?
Every day.
because at the end of the day, your brain cannot tell the difference between you actually doing it and you thinking it, unless you might be running a marathon. You're like, I think I want to run a marathon, and running that marathon's could be a little bit different. But for the most part, when you're engaging your brain and you're starting to make that shift forward, your brain is already moving into that shift. It's starting to think about how things are going to get affected. And so you literally can get worn out from that. So I start from having people understand that you're going to take time to build up that motivation. And then we start working into figuring out your soul need, like I mentioned before, right? That's such an integral piece. It's basically understanding your internal self and understanding what it is that you want. I'll give you an example for myself. And I'll tell you a funny story, again, medical based. So in 2019, I started doing my personal and spiritual soul search journey. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew there was more in my life. And I've always had an interest in medicine. My maiden name actually was doctor. I was born a doctor. So yeah. So yeah, medicine's been kind of in my life for a while. So I've done various jobs in hospitals and things like that. So I was thinking, well, I really like medicine. I'm really interested. I have a background and experience in it. Well, what do I want to do in it? And I was thinking, well, I'll go be a physician assistant, right? I was like, that's what I want to do. And so I did everything, right? I started looking for a new job that would support my study hours and everything like that. I started applying to PA school. I started applying back to college to redo my sciences, all of this. And I was telling my family, my coworkers, this is what I'm going to do. And then it hit me one day, probably in a shower, because that's where everything comes to me. I realized what I wanted, what my soul need was to own my own time. I was like, well, being a PA is not going to allow me to own my own time.
I love it. Do you know, this is the most undervalued I guess aspect to the life. If you don't have time, then you're a slave.
Right. And at the end of the day, not everybody's going to want to become an entrepreneur. That's just not for everybody. But if you're going to spend X amount of hours throughout your week away from your family, working for somebody else, you need to make sure that it is right in alignment with what you want to do, what gives you value, where you can provide value, and so if you can figure out your soul need, define it and apply it to your life, then you can get onto a path that is going to provide you so much more fulfillment and happiness. And, you won't feel like just sort of mired in the muck of having to work to survive,
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that can definitely be another conversation on its own, because making your money work for you is what probably everyone should be aspiring to. But yeah, again, that's a whole different podcast. So I guess, in your coaching sessions, where do you get people to start? So you mentioned, finding your own values, but how would you go about doing that? Where do you start?
Well, so like I mentioned, I have a guide. It's called Channeling the Woo to Find the True You. And while I don't have people sit around with crystals and things like that, again, like I mentioned, people turning off the logic and focusing inward is just not something most people are used to doing. Yeah. And so I have a guide, and I have little I hate to say self-help sheets, but essentially it's like self-homework, right?
Yep.
Right. And, I tell all my clients, look, I'm here to support you. I'm here to guide you, but you have to do the work. I'm not a fairy. I'm not a genie. I can't make it all better for you with a wave of my wand. So I give them different questions to help them, kind of peel back the onion that is themselves and figure out what it is that they want. One of the questions, actually, this was something that I had to learn that I was actually doing subconsciously. I asked them, who do you see and envy, and why? Because there's always a reason, and it's usually because something's missing, right? We don't want what that person has just to have the thing. It's usually what the thing represents, right? And I would be driving to work in traffic, all the kids and everybody in the back. And I'd see all these people in the neighborhood out like jogging with their dog. It's like 8 o'clock in the morning. And I was like, well, clearly you don't have to go to work. And I'd always be so envious of these people. And I never really like acknowledged why. And then I was like, oh my gosh, I'm envious of their freedom. Like I assumed they're like working for themselves or whatever. I mean, how they could have been like you and I, where they, where this was their one day off from the hospital and
finish night shift and then doing a run before they go to bed. You don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
But I assumed, because that's what I wanted to own my own time. I just never recognized it, but it will always show up in little ways in your life.
I love this. In fact, I'm going to write this down, as this is a really good point that you've made. Cool. Yeah, absolutely. And I think though it's important that people, really grasp this concept to be able to see the bigger picture.
Right. And it's all about, I will tell you, 9 times out of 10, what you want to do, like what your true calling is, has been showing up in your life for years. I mean, for me to have my epiphany that I wanted to own my own time and be an entrepreneur was really stupid, because I've been starting businesses since I was 18. Like I've been striving towards that goal forever. And I don't know why, like it took me a whole year and several different career options later to figure this out. But it's because we never allow ourselves to ask those questions. Our brains are just in biological survival mode. You've been told you go to college, I always say that this was the plan laid out for most people. I think you and I are probably in a similar generation, but you were told, okay, you're gonna graduate high school, you're gonna go to college, you're gonna get a good job, then you're gonna find your spouse, get married, get your house, have your kids, work for 30 years, and then travel until you die if you have time left.
Absolutely. And in reality, it's not always like that. I think that, well, for me personally, to be outside of the system is, it really works in your favor on the long term. So yeah, but again, we're probably sidetracking, because we're coaching people to how to be successful within the system, and then
right. And I think, honestly, it's important, right? Like if you can find that alignment, and like I said, right, just because you and I are outside of the system doesn't mean that's for everybody. There's plenty of people that wouldn't be, but the more people understand themselves as their own brand and business, the more successful and happier and fulfilled they can be inside the system. And plus understanding all the different jobs that are out there. We get stuck in the idea that there's only certain types of jobs because that's what we hear about all the time. But there are so many like awesome, crazy jobs out there, so all of this goes into it.
Absolutely. Nicole, you have been absolutely fantastic. I can hear my little one in the background, so I might say thank you so much. Please let me know, how can people connect with you? How can they join your program if you're interested? Where would be the best place to connect?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the best place to connect is imnottoast.com. That would be my website, or of course through LinkedIn. Yeah.
Super. I will put all of the links to your LinkedIn and to your website. Is it, or YouTube?
Yeah, so it would be my website. imnottoast.com is my website, and then of course my LinkedIn. So
amazing. Perfect. Thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it. And I would love to connect again with you soon.
Yeah, absolutely. This has been great. We have so much to talk about.